welcome. I'm John Fana still with VIA International, and this is the second in our VIA Voices series. Thanks so much for joining us. The VIA Voices is one of our efforts to make ourselves available through this digital medium, and to get to hear from voices from along and across the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, where we do so much of our work, and then also to hear from folks through the VIA International network, which we're especially pleased to be doing today. I'm going to turn this today's interview over to Elisa Sabatini, President and CEO of VIA, who will be interviewing Molly Porth Cabrera, longtime friend, collaborator, staff person. And I'm going to let Elisa introduce her in just a minute. Before I do that, just 2 words of orientation to today's session. We'll be meeting for just about 45 minutes. And Elisa will be interviewing Molly. And during that period of time, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, we encourage you to use the chat function. If you've not been on Zoom before, at the bottom of your screen, you should find a little chat icon. And if you click that, it'll open the chat room. And that's where you could jot down questions or comments. And after Elisa and Molly chat for a while, we'll lift up some of those questions that come out of the chat room. I'll also take that opportunity to share a little bit more about the VIA Cafe, which is our online virtual cafe that we've opened, again, to reach out to folks near and far from our network. So we really appreciate your joining us today. Welcome once more. Bienvenidos a todos. And I'm going to turn it now over to Elisa Sabatini. Elisa?
Welcome, everyone. And I am here at our offices in Logan. We're having a little bit of opening, but I really want to say how honored I am to have with us today Molly Porth Cabrera. She, way back, a decade ago, came from St. Joseph's University in Pennsylvania on a VIA border program. And we stayed in touch over the years. And now with Molly's support, we've had some wonderful experiences with groups visiting Mexico City, where she now resides. And we thought that with everything going on, which you see one of the things going on is a little bundle that Molly's holding, that it would be really fun and interesting to hear from her today. But to start off, I think that when we oriented ourselves, scheduled ourselves to do this particular interview, the things of the past week were not in our view. And you know, Molly, I know you're from Philadelphia, and today is the primaries there. And I thought maybe we would take a moment, given what's going on across our nation, and just hear a little from you about that. And I guess sort of the other attendant question is there a relationship with what's happening here, and kind of how is that paralleled with the relationship in Mexico City with police?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Elisa. Thanks for having me today. It's great to connect via such a wonderful organization made up of such wonderful people. So it's really nice to have this section during this difficult time everywhere. Yeah, it's first of all, I want to apologize, Elisa, for everyone else, to give you some context. I texted her about an hour ago, and I was like, wait a second, I don't know if we should be doing this. I had just seen the Blackout Tuesday hashtag and content, and I think especially, you know, I've been in fight or flight survival mode for 6 weeks now since Nico was born. And seeing all of this stuff erupt over the past couple of days, I think is partially what has brought me back to, quote unquote, the real world, or, you know, the outside world. So anyway, I apologize for those panicked messages. I do think it's important, and I appreciate you mentioning it, to acknowledge, you know, everything that's going on, and to acknowledge, of course, that that the purpose or the idea of Blackout Tuesday is to elevate voices of Black people involved in this movement of Black Lives Matter, So I would just mention to everyone who's connected today to check out resources. Maybe we can post a link afterwards about this movement. But anyway, yes, we're living in interesting times, and back in Philadelphia, of course, you know, it's a major city in the U.S. I think about 40% Black, and so there have been riots. There has been a lot of unrest, and so it's hard following it from such a distance, to be honest. But I support the movement that's going on, and obviously it's time for change. And interestingly, of course, it is primary day there, so that's one of the most tangible ways anyone can make change anywhere, right? Is by activating that civic duty of voting. So if we have any Pennsylvanians out there, well, I think at least one or two, reminder to get your votes in, and make your voice heard.
Is the sort of other part of my question was about, if people don't know or may be curious about the relationship with police in Mexico City.
Police like on the ground here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because there's so many layers to it, but here in Mexico City, there's a large distrust of institutions, right? I mean, that's Mexico in general, but of course, Mexico City especially. And so I think there is, if in the US, it's something that we're seeing mostly in communities of color, Black communities, and kind of disenfranchised communities. Here, I think across the board, there is just an overwhelming mistrust of institutions, including the police. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking with Jorge, my husband, and we're in a pretty densely populated neighborhood of the city. For those who know Mexico City, we're 2 blocks off of Reforma. So lots of traffic, cars, people, but of course now in the pandemic, you see a lot less people out and about. And we were just walking down our street, and it's a one-way street, and all of a sudden we see a cop car driving the opposite way up the street. And I mean, it wasn't going to do anything. It was just driving casually. And it really helped me, you know, the deep institutional corruption, or so what I'm looking for. Yeah, the institutional corruption that exists here. Something as little as going 2 blocks, you know, up a one-way street in the wrong direction during a pandemic, when of course their actions aren't hurting anyone. But if they are allowed to do that and they don't have any repercussions, then, you know, it makes sense that it just trickles down. It trickles down. And so if that action goes without repercussions, then, you know, you kind of understand a little bit, like, just, you know, the deeply entrenched corruption that exists within those types of institutions here. So yeah, yeah, it's interesting to draw those parallels.
Well, I think moving on to more of the COVID situation, which of course is happening in different ways in different places. I was really interested to sort of get your perspective about, and I know you've been in a lot because little Nico, but sort of what's happening there right now, and to know a little more about, I know here at the border, we've had a lot of food security issues, but I just you know, Mexico City being such a huge city, spending to whatever, 25 million people. What's sort of the experience there?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I had Nico on April 24th, 6 weeks ago, and here the pandemic and the non-mandatory lockdowns started mid-March. So by the time Nico was born, I had been pretty much in my house in isolation for a month and a half. And yeah, so it's interesting because, as you say, it's a huge city, about 8 million within the city limits and 25 to 28 in the sprawl, very densely populated. And of course, I think about 60% of the economy is informal. I believe that's in all of Mexico. But of course, Mexico City is the hub of commerce and the economy here. So for that reason, the government actually never mandated a lockdown. Instead, it was suggested or recommended to the population to stay indoors. And so, of course, that's one thing for 40% of the population who has formal employment, but for the majority of people, they don't have that option to stay home safely, because staying home means literally not eating if they're not making, those days pesos to put food on the table. So, so as it is in the US, COVID here has been very much along class lines, the contagion rates, because of that fact. A lot of people are still out and about. They don't have any choice. People who do have choice, like me, have been shut in since that time. And to be totally honest, leading up to when Nico was born, I was following the news daily. There's a daily press conference that I think has been really, really well done, and I appreciate the transparency. But the head of the Minister of Health offers a daily health press conference to update the public on the situation and the recommendations. I haven't been following closely since then because I'm alone with Nico most days, so I just haven't had the time and mental energy. But I do know that we're in the highest contagion kind of peak right now. We're using a stoplight system, and hopefully within the next couple of weeks, they're going to start easing up on some of the restrictions or recommendations. But yeah, right now we're in kind of the thick of it. And it's been
tough. Or it's by red, yellow, green, is that?
Yeah. Yes, red, yellow, green. So we're obviously in Mexico City red because of the population density. Yeah, the contagion rates are very high here. So we're in red, but other areas of the country are getting back to business as usual, who have parts of the country that have lower or even zero, perhaps, contagion rates. And then I think here in Mexico City and the other red zones, we're hoping for like mid-June to start to see that curve flattening out a little bit.
And have you heard of hospitals being without enough equipment, or is it feeling like they've kind of got the protective equipment they need? And
it's hard to know what to believe, as are a lot of things here in Mexico. You hear things from the ground that are contrary to what the government reports. So it's hard to know what to believe. I would like to believe that, I would like to give the benefit of the doubt to everyone. But what they're reporting is, I think, about 60 to 70% in Mexico City, hospital capacity.
Mm.
But you hear about health workers protesting across the country and not having adequate access to the protective equipment. So it's hard to know what to believe. And I also have to acknowledge that I'm speaking from a bubble of privilege. I don't know anyone, who is infected, and I've been able to maintain the lockdown and not worry about our economic reality. So I do have to acknowledge that that is the perspective I'm speaking with. But there have been reports by New York Times and other media outlets reporting, that the hospitals are overcrowded and people are being treated in waiting rooms, and medical personnel being infected to the degree of having shortage of personnel. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know what is accurate, sadly.
I know I saw one article, I think it might have been New York Times, that was speaking about the levels of deaths in Mexico City that are much, much higher than any of the previous 2 or 3 years. And they were sort of assuming there that a lot of people were just dying at home and they weren't necessarily associated with the COVID crisis, but and may, just because they were moving into other areas that they were not, or they were either hesitant to go to the hospitals, but that the death rate in Mexico City is higher than in former years at this time. So that's the other thing, is that some of this I think we'll never know. We'll never know exactly the outcome of the situation. But
Right.
I guess another sort of question attendant to Mexico City, are there any of the protests? I know some protests are happening around the world related to the injustices here. Do you know if there's anything happening in Mexico City?
So I know that there was a vigil outside the embassy. I guess it was 2 days ago. People went and left roses as a symbol for George Floyd. Protests, not so much. I don't think there's enough maybe Americans, or where would we direct kind of that anger towards. But yes, I think it was a symbolic showing outside the embassy of American expats who reside here. But yeah, protests I haven't seen. There was a protest over the weekend against the government, against their handling of the COVID situation. And I think that was more related to economy, to the economic side of the president hasn't been particularly supportive of the business sector. He hasn't really given breaks, so to speak, to a lot of the private institutions. So I think that was a protest of, to be honest, more middle class, formal sector folks. And I think that's all that I've been aware of. Oh, it was in Tijuana as well. Okay.
So maybe across the country.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things it's kind of obvious that I want to ask you this with that little Nico in your arms, but as a new mom with the movements underway and this COVID situation, I guess, how are you seeing this for future generations, for his generation? How are you sort of
Wow.
incorporating this into your thinking of raising him and what
That's a
it be for
big
him.
question.
It's a big
A
question.
big and good question. Um, I mean, it's certainly undeniable that the generation of babies who are being born during this are going to have a completely different experience of life that we can even imagine because I mean, there's still so much to be seen, right, with the fallout, both in terms of the physical health and the economic health of our communities. So I think there's still a lot to be seen. Um, just speaking from my own perspective, I'm participating in a local virtual postpartum circle, and the facilitator of this circle stated that the babies born in this pandemic are going to be, so to speak, like the most spoiled babies, just in terms of the time they're getting with their parents. And she said the parents of this pandemic are going to be like the most connected with their children. I do think that's true. I mean, it's been challenging. Nico hasn't met any family members other than one aunt and one cousin. And so that has been really challenging for our mental health, for just wanting to share these moments with our loved ones. So that's been really challenging, but I think it is true that that we're going to be just a much stronger family unit coming out of this. And obviously, it's not by choice. If I had a choice, we would be conviving, spending time with my family, with Jorge's family, but we haven't been able to. And so it's not by choice, but I do think, you know, we will be a stronger family unit after being through so much kind of adversity, so to speak. And just in terms of the racial injustices that we're seeing kind of come to a boiling point, I think parents all over the world are going to have to make the decision whether they're going to educate their children, at least speaking from a white perspective, educate their children on these views and justice and yeah, whether to educate or not, you know, to remain silent or to be active. And I think it's an opportunity for parents, for new parents. I'm in another kind of chat group and WhatsApp of new parents in the US, and they were sharing resources on how to talk about racial justice with your toddlers. So, I mean, we're not there yet, but I've seen a lot of things going around that it's never too early to start. So I think it is also an opportunity for new parents to begin to educate their children, to become advocates for justice.
Well, as we all know, our large program for educational and solidarity travel has come to kind of a screeching halt. But I think that one of the things I've always felt is that these programs are an opportunity to, in some ways, take people out of their comfort zone and allow them to engage with people that would be sort of never in their sphere in their own neighborhood or their own life experience. So I'm hopeful that we will turn a corner and, you know, once again be bringing as many as possible, as many that are interested, groups of folks down to Mexico City, and they can now not just meet you and Jorge, but meet Nico.
Mm-hmm.
So,
definitely.
So I think it's an odd moment we find ourselves, and I guess, the blessings in it right now, at least for VIA, for our little VIA family, and is that there is this magical opportunity of technology to connect in a way like this. So maybe we'll leave those questions there, and I'll turn it back to John, and we'll see what if he has a little sum up or a little thing to offer here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Elisa, and thank you again, Molly, for being with us. Yeah, I want to invite people. There's several people have already chimed in with questions on the chat box, but please feel free to add. We'll lift those up in just a minute. And I do want to take this opportunity to encourage everyone to engage. Thank you for being here today and to continue to engage with us. We're online now, both at our website, but especially at the VIA Cafe, the online virtual cafe that we've launched, viacafe.org. And I just want to share that, site with you briefly, and especially to draw your attention to a couple of offerings that are coming up. We are launching Spanish classes. We've had a couple underway, and we'll be continuing to do that. And specifically, Dan Wattman, my friend, who's teaching a Spanish 101 class right now. He will be launching a new series of 101s in just a couple of weeks. We filled our morning class, and so Dan is going to be launching a Spanish 101 offering. We're not sure whether we're going to do this at 4 p.m. Pacific or 7 p.m. Pacific. We're looking for people to let us know what would be the best time for them. But that starts on June 22nd. And just a couple of weeks from yesterday, Monday, June 15th, I'll be starting a Spanish class at the 201 level. That's kind of for folks who already speak some Spanish, but really to rehearse the fundamentals and practice basic conversation to help them build relationships and build friendships. If you're on our VIA International website, you'll be getting an email just within the hour, I think, specifically advertising these Spanish classes. And so I know many of you on this in this forum are great Spanish speakers, but if you have friends who you heard mention that they've thought about taking Spanish, there really are Spanish classes coming up at every level.
That looks like it's
So let me just encourage you again to visit viacafe.org. There's a lot else going on, and we appreciate your engaging with us through that new media. Let me ask now that Joanna, Aida, for others from our staff, are there questions in particular that have popped up from the chat room that we'd like to lift up?
There are a couple questions in the chat room. One has to do with, and actually I have a question that sort of relates to this as well, has to do with blame. Jim Gerber asked, we'll put out there that it seems that people in San Diego can often blame people in Tijuana for things as a source of infection, you know, with what's going on with COVID and vice versa. He's wondering if you see any attempts to shift the spotlight toward the United States to distract from what's happening in Mexico right now.
In terms of infections?
I believe he's referring to COVID. However, with whatever's going on in the United States right now, that could distract from what's happening in Mexico with COVID. Certainly in the news in the United States, COVID has taken a back seat.
Yeah. No, I think, no, I haven't seen that, to be honest. Of course, I've been in lockdown since mid-March, so I'm sure there's a lot I'm missing, but from my circles, you know, and the news that I've seen, I don't think so. I think Mexicans tend to be what's the word, solidarity. You know, when the earthquake happened, for example, you kind of see the classes come together and support each other. And I think that's the general sentiment. People want to have that solidarity towards each other. Maybe not towards institutions or the government, but towards people, there's usually kind of that more spirit of solidarity as opposed to blame. You usually see blame more placed towards institutions and government, you know, that type of thing. But no, I haven't seen blame. In terms of infection.
That actually leads me to another question that I have, which is early on in the COVID crisis, there were reports coming out of Mexico that first responders and health workers were being really discriminated against. They were subject to violence against them, that people were fearful that they might be spreading the virus. Is that still happening, or has that subsided?
I think that happened before I had Nico, because I was still keeping up really closely on every update, every development, and the Minister of Health addressed that in one of his press conferences. And to be honest, I haven't heard of it. I haven't heard of it happening since then. But yeah, that must have been like mid-April, where there were a couple of assaults, I think, on medical workers, like violent assaults. But yeah, it was addressed, and I haven't heard of it since then.
There is a question here from Gabe, who's one of our VIA employees. He said, it feels like we're moving away from the customer's always right perspective, as we're seeing significant shifts in what used to be called customer service. On a practical level, your day-to-day experiences, have they changed in regards to basic services, supplies, etc.?
So it's literal, it's not a metaphor, he's asking, like literally customer service.
Literally.
I haven't heard about that. That's interesting. No, actually, I've been much more dependent on certain services than ever before. The courier services, the grocery delivery services, takeout services, and no, I think the people who are working for those services, I would suspect that they are happy to have so much work right now. And that's kind of the reality of the informal sector. So many informal employees, street vendors have been put out of work, and I think those services are some of the services that have been probably doing really well, economically speaking. So I haven't encountered any negative experiences with customer service or those services.
Well, Molly, this is John Fanistil, and you mentioned a connection to the New Mothers group that you've been part of. I'm just curious to know what's your social, how are you connected technologically? Are you a WhatsApp person, or what social media channels do you use, or what networks do you find yourself kind of getting connected to during this time of quarantine?
Yeah, well, everything is done WhatsApp here to start with, so that's just been a constant. I'm in a couple of mothers groups on WhatsApp, and Zoom has been implemented. I teach yoga. I teach yoga, and so I'm connected to the yoga community, and everything has been moved online, similar to the US. And the postpartum bill that meets on Zoom, that's a group that would meet in person if we weren't in a pandemic. They're all local people, but that's also on Zoom. So I think pretty similar to what you've seen in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. And was WhatsApp a part of your daily life before quarantine, and now it's just?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. People use it. I mean, people use it more than email, I would say. It's how people communicate here. Yeah.
I was always amazed at when we'd welcome new people, to Tijuana, for instance, or to San Diego, new arrivals. It was very clear that they had navigated their entire chain of migration by way of WhatsApp, right? That was how they traveled, sharing news and connections, and So I've kind of always thought about that virtual migration as an interesting phenomenon, right? The revolution of that technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What other questions are there?
Jim Gerber just asked a question asking if you think people worry more about the economic shutdown or catching the virus.
I think it depends on your your economic class.
Sure.
Mhm. Like what I was saying about the informal economy, people who are still selling in the streets don't have the choice to stay home. They can't. So for them, the risk of hunger from not earning pesos is more real than the risk of being infected by the virus. At the same time, there's a lot of fear around the virus. But yeah, I would say, I mean, it's just so many people can't afford to worry more about the virus than eating daily.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is another question, given your circumstances, you just probably had a lot of experience with the medical profession. Someone would like to know, how has your experience been with the medical professionals, offices, hospitals, etc., during this pandemic?
Yeah, I've had really wonderful experiences, but again, I'm speaking from a place of a lot of privilege, where we have good insurance. Mexico is a country that has private insurance, public insurance, and then an option for government workers. So there's a whole kind of spectrum of quality and access, and I do have really good access and really good insurance. But with that said, with my whole pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum period, I've had really wonderful, compassionate care providers that I feel really lucky to have. And I think there's a lot of things that I see in the system here that I think are much better than the system in the US, from my understanding. So I feel lucky to have had really positive experiences. Yeah.
Good news. That's all I see in questions right now, John.
Okay, thanks. Other questions for Molly before we prepare to close? Thank you so much again for joining us. I want to say a brief word about the next couple of weeks at the Via Voices, the folks we have scheduled to join us next Tuesday and the following. But let me just check one last time to see, are there any follow-up questions, final questions? Thank you for using the chat room, but if you want to ask a question in voz alta, you can unmute yourself, and we're glad to hear your voice as well. Yeah, any last questions for Molly before we prepare to close? Very good. Well, let me share with you then briefly just a brief preview of who's coming next week. Next week, Dr. Alberto Pulido, a friend of Via International and of specifically of Chicano Park, will be joining us to talk about the place of educación in the borderlands. So please join us next Tuesday, 12 noon, for Dr. Alberto Pulido. Alberto's a longtime compañero of our colleague Rigo Reyes, and Rigo will be leading that conversation with Alberto about the changing landscape of education, both from his position at University of San Diego, but also how he sees popular education changing in these days. And then the following week, June 16th, I'll be interviewing Graciela Zamudio, who's in fact another native of Mexico City, but has now been in Tijuana for a couple of years, establishing a human rights organization called Alma Migrante, whose principal preoccupation is raising up advocates for human rights from among the residents of Tijuana. So Graciela, who does remarkable work, will be the interview 2 weeks from today. You can sign up for those weekly sessions, again, at viacafe.org. You'll see a place to sign up for the next event, free ticket for $0. And then there's also a couple of opportunities to sponsor. If you'd like to support this campaign and this program of weekly interviews, you're welcome to make a sponsorship contribution. Several people on this call have already done that. We want to say thank you to everybody who's chipped in already. We're supporting this project, both the Via Cafe and this Via Voices interview series, through contributions that come in through that medium. So Via Cafe, if I'm not pitching it hard enough, viacafe.org is where we're trying to get you to go. And please share that website with others. Elisa, do you want to close us out? Anything last quick query or words that you'd like to share with Molly before we go?
Yes, I think I would like to just say that I think for a lot of people, the last few days have been probably one of the penultimate difficult times of this COVID crisis, and combined with such a strong realization of the injustice in our society. And I think a lot of people are feeling disconnected, feeling alone, feeling far. And so I mostly want to say thank you very, very much, Molly, for joining us today. And I think for making all of us feel a little more connected and a little more connected to life itself, bringing little Nico with you. And so, you know, many blessings across the miles. I hope it will be soon that I'm hopping on a flight in Tijuana to come in and meet my little nephew, Nico.
Thank you so much, Elisa. It was a pleasure. And thanks to everyone who joined.
Yeah, Molly, any last parting words from you? We so appreciate your being here. We wish you well. Thinking of you from long distance. It's a real pleasure to meet you virtually. I'll look forward to the opportunity to do that face to face. And just know that you have the VIA International Network lit up in support of you and your new family. We wish you every good thing in these days.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to the day that we can reconvene in person again.
Very good. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you for joining from near and far. We're going to circulate this interview online, but after the fact. We didn't live stream it to our Facebook pages. But sometime in the next couple of days, you should see this on Via International's Facebook page and also on the Via Cafe Facebook page. And so please do share the word, spread the word, invite your friends, sign up for next Tuesday. Again, the place to do that is viacafe.org. Elisa, thank you so much. From the rest of the VIA staff, Rigo Reyes, Aida Amador, Joanna Salazar Harris, Gabriel Reed, all the rest of us, we wish you well. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.